is seeds of dis-ease, impatience, restlessness, frustration, and eventually anger. Because you can't get it. That is a false expectation. Which in an interesting flow of my consciousness moved me towards holy habits and the subject of worship. Because what has happened in worship in the 35 years I've done ministry is that worship has become harder and harder and harder for this very same reason, and the advent of technology and screens and music and all these kinds of things, that it wants to be eye-popping and it's got to be great and it's got to be grand and it's got to somehow either mirror and mimic culture or beat it. Otherwise, it just isn't. And what worship becomes then is a performance by me or by the choir rather than an offering and a gift to God. It becomes something different than it should be. It doesn't have to, and I'm not poo-hooing all those things. They add to us, and that is our world. But sometimes they become more important than us coming here and what we bring to worship. The word worship means the work of the people. Did you know that? That's literally what the word means. It's our work together here. Not me doing it for you, but us doing worship together. We become a reflection of culture or even in competition with culture rather than an alternative voice and perspective within culture. I saw a film of a church, a video of a church in Texas. Everything's big in Texas, You think I'm kidding. Anyway, the church on Pentecost, when the minister said the right words, you're going to love this, behind the choir, flames shot up. Pretty spectacular. Got a lot of hits on YouTube. But is it about the flames, or should it be about something else? You see, it says, we have to make God big when God is already pretty big. God doesn't need our help with this. Quite the opposite. Our big God chooses to work with little people. Us. Our big God chooses to work with little people like us as we bring to this place at this time in what we call worship the realities of our hopes, our fears, our anxieties, our dread, our love, our joy, and we offer it all up. We come here prepared to offer to God who we are. It's not right or wrong. It's not something else. We're not looking for magic. Martin Luther called that hocus pocus. We come here bringing our junk. And we come here not in an attempt to get God to do what we want to do. That's manipulation. We come here giving to God our stuff that we might figure out what God wants us to do. So refocus. As a teenager, I once tested the prayer theory that if you pray about it, God will do it for you. You believe that? Yeah. So I set aside studying for a test and prayed for my personal success. Confident in my faith. And you might be surprised to be told that I received an A. The problem was, as my mother said, that A only had one leg. Think about it. Which is why it is not only misleading, but distressing and disturbing when a preacher with a national audience tells her congregation not to get the flu shot because Jesus will protect you. When 84 children have died. So friends, worship is about bringing to God who we are today and then listening for some word to come to us and to speak to our spirit so that when we leave, we are working towards a resolution response. We are working towards some change and some action that it really makes a difference. And sometimes it comes through song, sometimes through prayer, sometimes through silence, sometimes even through a sermon. Some of you know when you leave church, you should never walk up or to me and say, "Good sermon." Because every preacher knows that people say that just to get around us. Right, it is. That's common knowledge. That's like seminary 101. You know, they walk up, good sermon, Keith, zoom right around. Yeah. Doesn't work that way with me. Because if you say that to me, my response will sincerely be, "What did you hear? Tell me about what you heard." Because I want to know. Sometimes people respond, and what I thought I said, they heard. But a lot of times I'm going, "Holy cow." But that's okay, because you see, from God's lips to our ears, the Holy Spirit works. And somehow, even on my worst days and my worst sermons, when I just want to bury my head and I'm so embarrassed, people say, "Thank you." That really meant something to me. You see, God does wondrous things when you come here and you offer it up and you open yourself up. Things can happen, things can change. God is still speaking. Sometimes they receive nurture, other times they've been severely challenged. But in all instances, I hope, my goal, sincerely, is to give you food for thought, which might make a difference in us and our world. Because if we come here only to have affirmed what we already think and already believe, then why come? And how's that working for us? How's that working for us? You know, sermons, I don't think sermons are preaching at. My perspective on sermons is that for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I'm never supposed to go past that, so I'm not going to say anymore. For the time that I am preaching, what is happening is I am hopefully so in touch with you and the world that I am wrestling and struggling with the same things you are. And for that length of time, for that 20 minutes, we reside in one another's minds. You are invited into the whirlwind of my mind, and I into you, the living room of your mind. And if it works right, when I am done and you are done, the furniture in the living room of our minds looks at things a little differently. It's been rearranged. Not by me, but by the Spirit. Which brings me to the final thing I want to say about worship, and that is that the goal of worship then is not really so much in coming or staying, it's in our leaving. You all knew that, right? You're looking at your watches. It's about leaving. But leaving here different, changed, and empowered. Because if worship is only about coming here and being here and always feeling good, that's self-gratification. That's a self-gratifying ritual. But if it's carried out there, it becomes powerful and life-giving and, yes, sometimes dangerous. Dangerous because it is such a contrast to much of what we see and experience day to day in our world. You know, slave owners let their people on the plantations worship because they wanted to use the scriptures to pacify them. That was the purpose. You could do it all, and you could praise, and you could get all worked up in worship. It was about pacifying you. Until it got out. And they were always worried about it getting out. Because it was a contrast, and it would threaten the way things were. People say the church, the preacher, should not talk about political issues, and some might be surprised to hear me say that I agree. You know, I've spoken against the abolition of the Johnson Amendment many times, and if you don't know that, look it up. But what I can never stop talking about are human issues. We make them political. They're human issues. And you got to hear me now. They're human issues. Jesus talked about human issues of poverty and of peace and of care. Those are human issues. It's just that politicians get anxious and they feel like they're losing control, just as they did with Jesus. When we, as the church, because they know how powerful the Spirit of God is, when we, as a church, talk about human issues, and they want it to stop, which they did with Jesus by silencing him. This past week, our nation was again caught in the grip of what I would have once called unimaginable tragedy. I no longer call it that because it's no longer unimaginable. In fact, as Borstein wrote in that book I was talking about at the beginning, the expectations have even bled into this area of our society because they've got to get bigger and bigger and greater, extravagant expectations, even in the horror of our lives. And there's more than enough targets to blame, which is really about avoiding the issue. You know, you can't on one hand say that the problem is mental illness and then cut back on helping the mentally ill or lifting the ban on mentally ill people with a mentally ill record buying these kinds of weapons. That's double talk. You can't do that. And it is ironic to me that if we were talking about drunk drivers, you know, we take a license away from a drunk driver for a year or two when we catch them because what? They might kill themselves, they might kill somebody else. Oh yeah, we get down on that one. And yet, this other one, somehow we just don't want to discuss. And we like to say that, oh, it's a poor family, or it's this or it's that. I have to tell you that in my own congregation over the years, I have had children that I confirmed who grew up and shot somebody. Good families. It wasn't that people weren't around them trying. Things went wrong. And I have had youth that spent time in prison because of rape. And it wasn't because the church wasn't trying, or their families as well. These are realities, they're tough things, and you have to start where you can. And yes, our prayers and our thoughts are important, but our prayers and our thoughts are equivalent to coming to worship and stopping after the call of worship. Coming and stopping. The book of James says, faith without works is dead. There has to be some manifestation, some response. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point? If it's not about discipleship, if it's not about Jesus saying, go into the world, then what's it about? But the Spirit has spoken to us, hopefully, that when we leave here the Spirit has spoken to us in some way, that we will respond. And more importantly, that we will get the people who can really do something to respond, to do it. And I don't believe, as has now been proposed in our state legislature, that permitting more people to have guns in schools is going to solve the problem. That's like sending an alcoholic to a, what do they call it, pong game, where you bounce, go play over there. Or, as the state of Alabama has done, they've now made it legal for churches to have their own police force. And I'm not naive enough to think that any of us are not susceptible to what could happen. A year ago, the gentleman who stood up and started yelling things at me in worship, he doesn't know me, he didn't know me, he starts yelling this kind of stuff. Where does that come from? Can't we talk? Or the gentleman whose wife had left him and somehow he found out that she was on Pass-A-Grille and he was looking her up and he snuck up and there he was in my office telling me his whole big story, and all of a sudden he looks at me and he says, I have a gun. And I immediately start looking the quickest path to the door. But then those of you who have been in my office know there is no quick path to the door. You see, we make it a political issue and we argue over it and it goes nowhere. It's not a political issue, it's a human issue, and it's even more than a human issue. It's a life and death issue. And we believe that I believe God is always about life. Because nowhere in the scriptures did I read Jesus saying, pick up your AR-15 and follow me. It's really not funny. And it's not meant to be. It saddens me. Because if we would give up anything to save one of those children, why are these things something we won't even consider? So the question is, this Sunday, as on every Sunday when you leave here, because we come, we bring it, we open ourselves up. Hopefully we are nourished, challenged, encouraged, empowered. Sometimes, who knows, but those things only mean something when we do what we're going to do next. Leave. And then the question is, as we leave, what will we do? Amen.